morning, Jeremy.
Now we're continuing to explore some of the people on the Warrnambool Pioneer Board. Where are we stopping off today?
Well, we're starting in Warrnambool with Henry Foster, who came here in 1842 with a fellow traveller, Mr. Strong, and they took up what was then St Mary's Run out near Wangoom. I'm just looking at some notes I have here from the Victorian Government Gazette. In 1849, St Mary's Run was of 16,000 acres. So what's that, about 8,000 hectares? Roughly 2 to 1. Had an estimated grazing capacity of 1,800 head. And its boundaries are interesting because they take in the whole of the modern city of Warrnambool. So it was bounded by the Southern Ocean, the Hopkins River, a fence that ran from the Hopkins River to the Merri, and then on the west by the Merri.
Right.
And one of the illustrations that we mentioned earlier on the Pioneer Board actually shows the fence coming down over the bank of the Hopkins out near what's now the ski club.
Right, okay.
And the fence went from there. One of our honoured members has described it, late honoured members has described it, from there up over the hill, basically straight down the straight of the race course and over to the Merri at the Wollaston Bridge.
Right, okay.
So that was the northern boundary of this property. Anyhow, Foster didn't stay long. His mate Strong, his dad died in England and there was a significant inheritance, so Strong went back to England to take up his inheritance. And not long after that, Foster disposed of St Mary's and joined the beginning Victoria Police Force.
Okay.
and became a copper.
Right.
And had an interesting life in that role. He was initially appointed to Geelong, but then on to the goldfields in the Mount Alexander area, and was in charge of the police at Ballarat at the time of the Eureka Uprising. Some of the literature in relation to that depends on which side you're on. Some of them paint Foster as a saint and others paint him as something quite different to that, and in his handling of all of that. The fact that he was then shunted off to a lesser position at Swan Hill perhaps indicates what the officials think about it.
Thought of him, right, yeah.
But there was a commission of inquiry into the uprising, and I read all of that, and yeah, Foster gets mixed reviews, shall we say,
right.
in the official thing. One of the significant things that while he was at Swan Hill, he was friends with Wills of the famous Burke and Wills expedition, and he was at Swan Hill when they crossed the Murray at Swan Hill on their way north on their expedition, on their ill-fated expedition. So the contemporary reports suggest that they had a fairly wild time in Swan Hill for a day or two while the party was there.
Right.
So all very interesting.
Yeah, right. I'm still fascinated by this fence, though. So this was like the original sort of boundary, more or less, was it? Of what is now Warrnambool. It
was described as a 3-rail fence, so it was a post and rail fence with 3 rails, and it went from there to there.
Yeah, right.
From the Hopkins to the Merri at Wollaston.
So who would have surveyed that, or who would have, how did that come to be?
These guys.
Right, okay.
Yeah, they were very independent gentlemen.
Right, okay.
All of these pioneers were.
So no one was there to argue about it, I suppose.
No one was there to argue about it. No, well, at that stage we were still governed from Sydney.
Right.
Victoria hadn't come to be.
Right, I see.
In faraway Sydney, they had no
nothing
idea
about
what was going on.
Does anything remain of this? I presume it's all gone, is it, the fence?
I'm not aware of anything. No, okay. Timber over 100 and something years has probably rotted away, and it lost its purpose. So Foster, it's interesting, he was born in Lincolnshire in England, and his father was a Church of England minister there, and he was originally destined for the medical profession. He undertook significant training at St Guy's in London before he came out here, but never in fact took up the profession. Although in the early days around Warrnambool he was much remembered as the doctor.
Really? Right. sort of frontier medicine.
Beamish, the Church of England minister at the time, says that they always called him Dr. Foster anyway.
Right.
But he wasn't registered as a doctor, but he just provided bush medicine, but he did have some training to back it up.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And then we get to the end of his life, and this is where it was interesting. The family took up a big station near Cootamundra in central western New South Wales, and he retired there. And the story was, one of the stories that was going around was that in fact he died in a gunfight with a bushranger.
Right.
Somebody that he dealt with when he was a copper had come to settle the score, and the two of them were supposedly buried together on the bank of some creek somewhere or other. Recently, a descendant has provided us with the full death certificate for Foster, and he died like many of us will, of senile decay.
Right, okay. Somewhat disappointing to discover that, isn't it?
It is. It's done away with a good story.
Yeah, right.
But it's a bit hard to argue with the official documentation.
Right, indeed. Yeah. Fantastic.
So he's one of the ones on the board who had a fairly fleeting association with Warrnambool. He married while he was here, but not a local girl, a Sydney girl. And after he got rid of St Mary's and went off to the police force, there's no evidence that he ever returned to Warrnambool.
Right, yeah. So his inclusion on the board then is interesting, isn't it? From what we were saying a couple of weeks ago about people, I guess, paying to be on this board, would he have done that? Would he have said, well, I think I've got a reason to be there?
No, because he was long dead.
Right, okay, right.
So some of the family must have done that on his behalf.
Yeah, right. Excellent. All right, well, Ray, thank you again. We'll talk more next week.
Thank you, Jeremy.